This is the Mobile Tech Podcast, brought to you by worldpodcasts.com. Now here's your host, Tech Girl, Miriam Joire.
Hi, and welcome to the Mobile Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Miriam Joire, and today is Wednesday, October 10th, 2018, and my guest is no other than Chris Davies of SlashGear. Hi, Chris. How are you?
I am good, thank you, Miriam. How are you?
I am great. We're both freshly back from New York City, where we attended the Made by Google event yesterday.
Definitely back. I'm not sure how fresh, but yeah, we are physically present.
Well, we're freshly back in terms of time. I'm not sure in terms of bodily function.
I'm
in terms
definitely
of
not
our
sure
health.
about bodily function. No,
we're slightly deranged, I think, by all the traveling we do anyway.
A little more than normal.
Right. So you were there, I was there. It was an interesting announcement. There's obviously some things we can talk about. I think it's pretty well known that by now that to the listeners that most of us journalists have review units.
Yes.
And we will be reviewing these. We have an embargo. We can't talk about the details of the phone, but we can give you, our first impressions. And I think that's, there's a lot to cover there. So
we can do broad brushstrokes, but we can't be the full Bob Ross.
Exactly.
I think is what you're trying to say. Yes.
But we can talk about some of the imaging quality because they were allowed to post photos. So that's kind of exciting, right?
It is. I was a little surprised at that, but I think it's kind of indicative of where Google is going this year. It's interesting just how much focus they put, excuse the pun, on the camera, and it does feel a lot like. Thank you for laughing. I appreciate that.
You know me. I love your sense of humor. It's my European heritage.
No, it's almost like it's not really a phone so much now. And I mean, obviously, the phone functionality of a phone, why do we still call it that? We hardly ever make calls anymore. It's used for so many other things. Maybe the thing that it's going to take over is being a camera, and it is a camera that's cellularly connected and just so happens to make calls and have access to your Gmail, and all of these things are distracting you from what you should be doing, which is taking really good photos.
But there is something to be said there, because Android started out way back when Andy Rubin started it.
Mm-hmm.
I believe, and correct you folks listening can correct me, but I'm pretty sure that I read a story once about how they were frustrated with the user experience on cameras and they decided to start Android. And then it kind of immediately turned into, what made most sense at the time because, of Andy Rubin's involvement with the Sidekick and Danger. But so kind of interesting to me because, I saw this early on. In 2004, I bought a non-smartphone with a camera. It was the Sony Ericsson W800i Walkman phone, which was a slightly cheaper but identical hardware as their CyberShot phone at the time,
right? Which
was basically a 2-megapixel autofocus. This was the first phone with an autofocus camera that was available readily in the US. And I could see, and the reason I bought it was because I wanted the imaging experience and of course the audio experience of the Walkman because it had an adapter for a headphone and, you had memory card support and things like that for MP3 playback. But I just wanted the camera, and I could see the future where you could carry a camera in your pocket that was also your phone. And more importantly, I was, this thing only had GPRS and I was using it to email photos to Flickr. Flickr allowed you, and I think still does allow you, to email it photos. You get a custom email address as part of your account that you can email to.
That's right.
Yeah. And so I did that for many years. And, eventually changed phones to like a Nokia Symbian phone with a decent camera as well. But my point is I could see the writing on the wall. And I'm really not surprised. I think the mainstream has definitely caught up. I think if you ask the average person on the street today, what are the, say, top 3 things that your phone needs to be good at? And I'm pretty sure most of them will have camera in their top 3, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And if you talk to the phone companies, they're very aware of that. The research they do, they all say, camera is the top, usually, factor that people make their buying decision based on. And yeah, I mean, it's become a game changer. I can remember how exciting it was when you first got a camera on a phone. In my case, that was a Sony Ericsson T68i. Though actually, I think
yeah, and it was an optional camera, wasn't it?
It was. It plugged into
it in.
the proprietary port at the bottom.
I had that phone too, but I only got the accessory kind of after the fact. Once I'd retired the phone, I bought it on eBay about 10 years later.
Oh, right. You see,
Yeah,
it's
just
funny,
to try
isn't
it
it?
out.
The nostalgia thing. You have to kind of give it a go. Yes.
Yeah, I did. It's great.
But it's interesting you're talking about that Sony Ericsson camera phone. It reminded me, at one point I was very gung-ho about the Samsung Galaxy camera. I don't know if you remember that.
I do remember that.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, I had a
Which is
review
kind
in
of
it.
coming at it from a very different angle, from the complete opposite angle, rather than being a phone that happened to be a really good camera. It was a camera that was connected. And that at the time, seemed like a really good idea. And unfortunately then it kind of fizzled out. And I guess I think maybe it was a little too early for this, for data plans where you could have multiple devices attached to the same data plan. So, if you wanted a data plan for it, you'd need to subscribe to a whole new line. And
I think there were a number of issues. I think for me, what it was it was bulky.
That's true.
Imaging performance actually wasn't that great. It was basically a very cheap point and shoot engine drafted onto an Android mini tablet. It had touch width and all that heavy-handed, Samsung stuff at the time. So I feel like they were, just like the Note, they were very, they were early kind of in that idea.
Yes.
It just didn't catch on, whereas the Note did. And I honestly think at the time when I was carrying it, I was thinking to myself, like, I wish my phone could do this. And so, like, do I really need a second device? What I thought was more interesting that is about a year or two after that, Samsung launched one of their NX series cameras. I think the interchangeable lens.
Yes. Maybe the NX100, perhaps.
I can't remember which one it was, but it was an Android based.
Right.
And that, kind of, they only did a one-off. And that to me was like, okay, yes, if you do a mirrorless camera, which is a purpose-built camera, I can kind of see the point, because the imaging performance at the time of a mirrorless wouldn't even, like, you couldn't even get a phone to be remotely in that league back then, right?
No, absolutely.
But now you are. I mean, now you can get a phone like the P20 Pro, the Pixel 3, 3 XL, and who knows what else is coming. But at least those, in my book, are probably getting close to the territory of like an RX100 series from Sony,
Yeah, no, I agree.
And it's incredible when you think about it because the sensor size, the lens, I mean, everything is so much worse in many ways, performance-wise.
It's a much bigger challenge, when you're making a camera. I'm not saying that I could go out and compete with Canon in my shed, but if you're making a dedicated camera, you can have something which is much, much larger than a phone, which has a bigger battery than a phone typically, and people sort of accept the ergonomic compromises that come with carrying a regular camera. Whereas if you're building a phone, you have a very, very small amount of space. People say how much they want a decent camera, but how much kind of bulk are they willing to put up with in order to achieve that? I think it's an interesting compromise that people have to make, and I think it's interesting that Google is kind of sticking with its idea of, okay, well, we're going to put a really good sensor in there, but we're going to do an awful lot of this with the computational photography. We're going to do it with software as much as we can, rather than trying to fit in multiple sensors like Apple and other companies are doing. I think that's a really interesting sort of dichotomy from the rest of the industry.
Yeah, and I think it's honestly the future. I think that there's still some merit from having multiple maybe lens types on your phone, like a wide angle, a zoom, because those are hard to replicate in software still. But I feel that Google is, kind of pushing forward with computational photography and, slowly eating away at the kind of mid-range camera universe, like dedicated camera universe, like point and shoots and maybe entry-level DSLRs like the Rebels and entry-level mirrorless cameras. Now, of course, those cameras still have the advantage of glass and large sensors, but what I'm constantly struggling with, Chris, and I know we're going away from Google here, but we'll regroup and come back. And this show is all about tangents, and we're having a really great discussion. So what I'm kind of puzzled by is why we're not seeing Nikon and Canon adopt this computational stuff for their DSLRs at the high end. Imagine all this glass and sensor and then throw in the computational stuff on top of it.
I do wonder if it's just a combination of old school thinking and just not having that expertise on hand. I think Google and other companies, other phone companies doing computational photography stuff are have been working on it for some time and, have been dedicating a lot of money into it. And, it takes a lot of things like, the machine learning to teach the algorithms that do like background deblur without having two lenses, that kind of thing. And I guess that is just a very different kind of skill set to the skill set that is required to make a traditional camera. I think, I would be very surprised if they're not looking at it and working on it. I mean, I would really hope for their sakes that they are. But I think also it probably is just taking a lot longer than we think.
Interestingly, when I was visiting the Leica headquarters in June or July, part of a Huawei trip to Europe, where we kind of learned more about the P20 Pro at the time, I asked them that question, and they actually told me, the Leica folks, that they're extremely seriously working on computational photography for their bigger, more expensive, dedicated, traditional Leica cameras.
I'm super glad to hear it.
Leica seems to be on board, and I think that there's a synergy or symbiosis between Huawei's AI know-how and software know-how that kind of Leica is benefiting from, and then there is the reverse of Huawei benefiting from Leica's expertise in lens and sensor and color science that they're kind of applying to the phones. What I learned during that trip is that the lenses in the P20, P20 Pro, and a lot of the Leica branded products from Huawei are actually made to Leica spec by large factories in China, because Leica could not themselves, doesn't have the volume to create that many lenses and sensors.
Absolutely.
But it's interesting to me that it's to their spec. So I think that, there's still hope for those camera companies.
I think it's interesting because we've seen phone makers kind of cherry pick the best of the camera companies, the people like Leica and Zeiss and that kind of thing, and put their brands on their phones to kind of give them a halo of sort of authenticity when it comes to photography. And I wonder if at some point we're going to see the reverse happen, and it'll be a Leica camera or a Canon camera or a Nikon or something powered by Samsung or powered by Google, or there's something that kind of people have been talking about recently on Twitter a lot, is this idea of, would it be great to have a camera that was running Google Photos? And I think that's a really fascinating idea. This idea of having a cloud connected computational.
Totally is what I want. Personally, the thing that I do now, I used to never edit my photos with my phone. I used to be kind of hardcore. I used to be like, I take the photo, and maybe I might tweak exposure by tapping on an area of the screen, or maybe focus on an area. But I'm going to frame this best I can right from the get-go, and I'm going to get the right white balance and everything right from the get-go in my phone. And I still think that way. I want to minimize the amount of developing I do. But now I actually do developing on almost every photo I take. Almost every photo I take with my smartphones go through Google Photos or Snapseed these days. And it's not for like filters or kind of like artistic expression. It's more like, oh, hey, I can tweak this, and just, I'm kind of basically pulling out more information from the data I have, because there is so much data there that hasn't quite surfaced yet. And I find that the pixels have been the biggest, the cameras on phones that have given me the most to play with. They seem to capture so much more data than other phones. And I can, edit quite a bit and kind of without, completely destroying the image quality. You know what I'm saying?
I do. And I think it's one of the kind of the pleasures of something like Google Photos, which makes it so easy to kind of experiment with something and then be like, okay, yeah, no, I'm just going to go back to what it was. Or even better, when it does something to your photo, whether that's applying a filter or changing
the auto stuff,
And sometimes, it presents you with something and you check it out and you're like, no, actually, maybe not that. But, sometimes I look at it and I think, yeah, actually, this is good.
Amazing.
I like this.
Exactly.
I'm going to save this. And it's just, it's funny talking about Google Photos, because this past week, obviously, I've been thinking about it a lot, because it was the one positive thing that span out of Google Plus. And obviously, Google just announced that they are going to sunset the consumer version of Google Plus. And that got me thinking about how I think actually Google Photos could be my favorite Google product of all. I use Google Maps a lot, and I use Gmail for my email, and I use Google Calendar, but, none of them kind of give me that same sense of sort of surprise and delight, to use a corny phrase, as something popping up in Google Photos does.
And, for better or for worse, because obviously you're giving data to Google and you're somewhat relinquishing some privacy, the auto upload is just, it just is a life changer. I feel like, there's so many photos that just would never go anywhere that I would take. And now at least they're backed up. And at least I might revisit them. Even if I don't, use them right away. And that's really changed my life. So regrouping a little bit of conversation, because, everybody's on the edge of the seats. They all want to hear about the phones. And we've been totally teasing them. I know we're terrible. We're like, I don't know, what is it now? Like, we're like 17 minutes in, we haven't mentioned anything about the event or the devices. No. We're bad people.
Terrible people.
But this was a really good conversation. I want to get your thoughts on the actual event itself, like the actual keynote, if you want to call it that. Within the context of the end of Google Plus, the recent privacy kerfuffle, but also in the light of all these leaks around the Pixel 3, Pixel 3 XL, and how it seemed like this presentation was great. It was clearly people worked really hard on it, but it felt like we were just ticking boxes, right? We're like, oh yeah, this, not really kind of like, there was nothing that put me on the edge of my seat or got me really excited because I felt like we knew everything. And that was, because of that, it felt like it was a weird keynote to me.
It did. It was obviously going to be tough for them because so much had leaked, and not just so much had leaked kind of in the week running up to the events. Things had leaked, months beforehand. And it did kind of feel like, they took the phones out and it was like, okay, okay, we've seen those. And it became a checklist of, had we seen this before? And yes. And then, they were their own worst enemy in a sense because, the day before that tweet and sort of giving that idea, that hint of, we've got a surprise for you. And then that just didn't really pan out into anything. So it was a very polished event, but it was very much a sort of a confirmation of what we'd already seen rather than anything super dramatic. And it did make me wonder, is there a better way that they could have handled that? Could they have, rather than sort of take this idea of, well, we're just going to kind of ignore it generally and announce things as if you hadn't heard about them. Could we maybe say, well, okay, look, people have been talking about these phones for 2, 3, 4 months now, even though we've seen just about everything there is about them. People are still excited. People are so excited. Why is that? Why are people so excited about these phones? Here is what we've done to improve them. This is why you should be excited. This is why, even though you're still hearing about these devices 4 months in and we're only just making them official, this is why you should be putting this phone in your pocket for the next 2 years as well. And I kind of wish they'd done that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I also feel like, it was interesting to me that they didn't mention anything at all about like this, what's recently been going through. And I get it, right? Like they probably wanted to stay away from the privacy and the Google Plus thing, but you have a room full of journalists that have just been dealing with this. And it felt so weird that they just glossed over that and just went right into this shiny presentation. But we had about 17 minutes of conversation about computational photography, the future of cameras and phones that are good at taking photos. And to me, the big takeaway here is that the Pixel 3 and Pixel 3 XL are going to continue, pushing the envelope and defining what, a camera phone should do and be. Mm-hmm. And that they've nailed. They have done it primarily through software and new features in software, which might possibly trickle down to the Pixel 2 and Pixel 2 XL. So I'm really, that's the part I was excited about. Those 3 new features they announced in the camera software, which were, let me think, the ability to pick the best shot, right? After the fact.
The new night mode.
The new night mode, which we haven't seen yet because I'm not sure that
the software for that isn't ready yet. No.
And then the super zoom thing, which is really, really clever because it basically uses since, the phones, with the Pixel, Pixel 2, and Pixel 3, what Google's doing is they're continuously taking photos while the camera is running, like the app, right? So they're taking hundreds of photos per second. And, when you push the shutter button, you're really just saying, this is the shot I want. And then it takes the photos near that time moment and kind of does all kinds of computational madness with it and gets you a photo and stacks them and does HDR by stacking them in terms of light amplitude, and it stacks them in terms of time by removing, blur and stuff like. So now they're doing another thing for zooming where you're always moving a little bit when you take a photo, right? Mm-hmm. Your hands are moving a bit. Even though the camera has OIS, it's still going to move a little bit. And what happens is you can capture kind of like variations on the same photo, and it gives you extra pixel information that you can kind of use to interpolate new pixels so that you can have more detail when you zoom in on a sensor that technically has a finite amount of detail. And that's exactly what they're doing. And, that takes a huge amount of computation, which is, the reason why they haven't introduced it yet, I presume, is because of the Snapdragon 845 and the crazy imaging chip that they have that's custom. What's it called again? The Pixel Core?
The Vision Core.
Visual Core or whatever, yeah. So I think that's, to me, are the things that are really interesting. I'm not sure, do our review units have the zoom thing enabled? I know they don't have the low light stuff.
No, I don't believe so. I think that's another one of those features which is still to come. But
that, to me, those three things are going to, I jokingly said during the keynote in Twitter that, when they posted that comparison between the iPhone XS and the Pixel 3 XL, that low light mode shot, I was like, yeah, there we go. The Pixel 3's leapfrogged the entire industry for another year again, kind of like the Pixel 2 last year. Maybe not another year, but my point is that I think this is the gift that Google is giving us with these phones. Yes, there's a lot of things to be complaining about. We can talk about them. The notch, the pricing, the fact that you're not really getting much more than any other flagship. But it's the imaging, it's the camera. To me, that's the part that really defines that, and to some extent, some features like the crazy thing where they're introducing duplex, where you have a third option. You can answer a call, you can, cancel, like ignore a call, and you can send it to duplex.
Have an AI answer it
and have
talk
an
on your
AI
behalf.
answer on your behalf. That's just, to me, that's sci-fi. That's crazy. I don't know how it's going to work, if it's going to work. I don't know if it's going to piss people off, but I love that Google's trying it out. I kind of am happy to be a guinea pig for this one, to be honest with you. It's kind of creepy, but at the same time, I'm like, it's so sci-fi and so out there that you can have this in a product that you buy and put in your pocket,
Yeah, we live in interesting times.
So in terms of hardware, you played with this. Let's talk about the phones first. You played with the Pixel 3, Pixel 3 XL.
Yes.
What do you like and dislike about them?
I really like the new design language. I think the glass back with the kind of the combination of almost like sandblasting, etching kind of panel on the lower section, leaving the glass shiny on the top. I think that's really nice.
I like that too, yeah.
Yeah, I think generally it just kind of feels softer and smooth and a little bit more like a rounded pebble in your hand, which is...
I feel that the phones feel like they're a pair more than last year.
Yeah.
Like, because last year LG made the 2XL and HTC made the 2, and the 2 had the 16:9 display with a huge bezel top and bottom. Mm-hmm. It just didn't feel like they were siblings, almost like they just felt like two different phones. The first gen Pixels felt totally like siblings, and this is kind of, I think, a bit more back to form, right?
Definitely. I think what surprised me was how much more I like the 3 than the 3XL.
Me too. And I can't make up my mind. I've got both here, and I need to pick one as my main phone because I always have a Pixel as my main phone. Mm-hmm. And last year was no doubt I put my SIM in the 2XL, but I keep thinking I haven't committed yet. I still have my SIM in my 2XL because I can't decide which phone am I taking to London next week.
Yeah. I think for me, it comes down to with the 2, that 5-inch screen was just that little bit too small compared with everything else out there that I've been using. Whereas now, 5.5-inch, that's a nice size display, and you don't have to deal with any of the kind of the notch nonsense.
It feels so great in hand. It's like the perfect size phone.
This combination of the size and the kind of the design and the construction. It feels nice.
the last 3 phones that felt like that to me, 4 maybe, are the iPhone 10 and 10s. They're the smaller one, right?
Right.
That's almost the same size. Like they just feel so great in hand. They fit in your hand really well. The Essential phone.
Yeah.
And then the P20 Non-Pro, which has kind of a twin in the Honor 10. Those 4 phones to me, and I'm including the Pixel 3 as the 4th, are kind of like the perfect size for my size hands.
Yes. Yeah, and obviously
And
all of this kind of comes
5
with a
point
disclaimer that, your hands are probably
course.
different to my hands. And I can always sit on my hand to make it feel like it's your hand, but it's then I drop the phone. But yeah, I think, I'm looking at the XL now and I'm thinking it's just that, is it just that little bit too big? And I think that the fact that you get all of the same features in
that's the other
3.
thing.
So, the only thing you're compromising on, the battery is a little bit smaller. And
1080p, but whatever.
Yeah, and which, I'm kind of over phone resolution.
Oh yeah,
wars.
I honestly, my eyes are not good enough to see the difference between 1080p and Quad HD. Like on the Samsung phones where they all run at 1080p, even though the screen is 2K, and you can set them to run at 2K. I always leave them at 1080p, and I can't tell the difference. My eyes are just not good enough. So, it's interesting to me that the 2XL that I have, that's my main phone, and then the 3XL are almost to the millimeter exactly the same size.
Yes.
Yet the 3XL looks massive to me somehow.
It does. The proportions are kind of weird about this phone, of the screen particularly. I think
notch. We have to talk about it. I know it's been hashed to death. This is a horse that's so dead that we're beating bones right now.
Yes. And I'm not, I feel obliged to point out very early on, I am not a notch hater.
Neither am I.
I feel like it is a necessary evil, because if you want a screen that takes up as much as possible of the front of your phone, and you want to have the front facing camera and various sensors that we have on a phone, and you don't want to have some sort of pop out thing, which I think that most manufacturers don't, then, you've got to have a notch. That's the nature of it. And I find that, I typically carry an iPhone as well as an Android phone, and I had an iPhone 10, and then I've got an iPhone 10s Max now, and I just don't see the notch anymore. I don't notice it.
It doesn't bother me either. This one just seems so out of proportion big.
It's weirdly deep, and I think that it's funny. On Twitter, Google was kind of having a conversation with someone who kind of asked about the notch and hiding it, and asking kind of, why did you do that? And they were saying, well, actually, in comparison, in terms of like notch to overall screen ratio, other companies have got a worse ratio than we have. And I think it kind of misses the point that it's an emotional thing. It's some people just really, really see this thing and they don't like it. And the shape of it and the depth of it is just, it looks weird. I think
part of it also is that the indicators on either side, like, the battery indicator, all the icons are not, on most notches, they fill that strip of screen, right?
That's very true. Yes.
But here they're kind of like floating in this empty space of strip. And it's kind of it's a proportion issue. And the other thing to me is, in the developer options, you can, on Android Pie, if you have developer build installed, you can actually turn off the notch on the Pixel 3 XL.
Right.
A few folks did it on Twitter. Just go and look on Twitter. And it instantly looks better. Yet you're wasting screen, because this mode doesn't just, keep the icons on the top left and right of the notch and make the background black. It actually just kind of ignores that part of the screen completely.
Yes.
Which basically means that you're just completely wasting some OLED by never turning it on.
Right.
Which is very odd. But I might go with the Pixel 3 XL and turn off the notch, basically, at this point.
Interesting. You see, I kind of feel like if you're going to do it, embrace it. Yeah. And I think, and adding to that kind of, because obviously that developer mode was never really intended for that. It was just to kind of give developers this, this idea of what the notch would look like. And so as far as I can tell, it doesn't actually, when you turn it on and kind of hide the notch, it doesn't give you any more, like you don't get a full band of notifications across the top. It will cut off as if the notch was still there. I just feel it's it's people looking desperately for a solution to that. And I guess I kind of feel like, you just have to say, well, okay, if I want this bigger phone, I'm just going to have to deal with Google's decision this time around.
It's funny because I think, none of the other phones that have the option to hide the notch and hide it in a clever way where they still keep the icons up there, but with a black background. None of the phones have turned it on. But with this one, if that option were to become available in a future build, or not a developer build, actually like a feature. Kind of remember like the Pixel 2 XL and the color temperature last year, the sRGB, and they fixed it by giving us vivid colors by default. I mean, honestly, to me, that fixed it, and I'm perfectly happy. I've been perfectly happy with the color space on my Pixel 2 XL ever since. But to me, they should give that option to people, because I actually feel that it's big enough that I'm not sure I can embrace it, and that if I did want the bigger phone, I might want to at least do the not, ignore the notch, like, which is what the developer mode is doing, but like reverse the, the rendering so that the background behind those icons is black. And that if you look at the phone, it doesn't look as shockingly in your face. I don't know.
Yeah. Maybe you just need a good wallpaper.
Maybe I just need to use the Pixel 3.
Maybe
I just need a small phone since it feels so great in my hand.
Save $100, get a smaller phone.
I don't know, Chris. I have this weird, I've been using a Note 9 lately a lot, and it's massive. It's huge, but God damn it, I love the real estate. It's so great.
It is.
So I'm kind of like, my Pixel 2 XL is pretty much the same size as the Pixel 3, at least the external size. So yes, I get a little more display on the Pixel 3 XL, but I'm not sure, like, that's my concern. Is like, if I go to the Pixel 3, will I miss the real estate, especially for typing on the keyboard?
Right. It's tough. I can't tell you what to do, and I'm not a doctor.
No, I know. I will bring it up with my psychiatrist.
Yeah,
yes, that's what I'm going to do. I want to talk about the other thing that was kind of interesting to me about. So the phones are identical, screens and batteries are different. Obviously, the Pixel 3 XL has that weird notch, which we just talked about at length, which is very polarizing. And then, other than that, they're identical. So the other thing that stands out to me is 4 gigs of RAM.
I wondered about that too. And I think that it's interesting because, in the past, if you look at where the kind of the Nexus phone project and kind of how that started and what that was kind of one of the intentions of that, it always was this is Google giving OEMs a message, people making Android phones, look, this is what you should be focusing on, and it went through kind of, looking at bigger screens and better cameras and that kind of thing. And I almost wonder whether this is a kind of a return to those days of, do what I do, kind of leading by example and saying, well, okay, would it not be better if the phone was so efficient that you didn't need to put 6 gig or 8 gig of RAM into it?
It's definitely a power saving. When you have to power 6 or 8 gigs of RAM, you're wasting battery. At the same time, yes, you can have many more apps open and it does feel different. But I never felt that 4 gigs of RAM on my Pixel 2 XL wasn't enough.
Yeah.
So I'm probably going to be okay. But it's just weird to me to see that they stayed with what is considered today kind of a minimum amount of RAM for a flagship. You know?
Yeah, I definitely know what you mean. I think it's too early kind of to say, we haven't used the phones long enough to talk about, how they actually perform day to day. In my first kind of impressions of them, they seem certainly quick enough that I think, that's pretty much the same with any phone that you buy when you take it out of the box. It's, it's ask yourself that maybe in 6 months' time and see how you're doing. I feel like it was a conscious decision. I feel like it was someone not just saying, well, okay, we're going to save a little bit of money and, rather than spend the extra on 6 gigs, we'll spend, we'll buy 4 instead. I do feel like it was more of a nod to saying, well, look, Android can be efficient and effective and run smoothly and deliver everything a flagship needs and everything people expect from a flagship with 4 gig of RAM. And if you need 6 gigabytes to make it run smoothly, you're doing it wrong. Yeah, you shouldn't be, you're bloating it wrong. And customers should be saying to you, well, what the heck? Why do I need to spend extra? Why do I have to pay the battery toll to get a phone with 6 or 8 gig of RAM or more or whatever, when the people who make Android have just shown me that, well, you don't need that. You can do something, you can do
absolutely.
something with much more marginal levels and get the benefits of that.
Totally. No, it's just an interesting decision. I mean, other than that, like honestly, I am really excited. But again, the camera is what it is for me. A lot of people are asking me, Miriam, you've been using the Nexus phones and the Pixel phones as your main phones since day one. I had a G1, then I went to the HTC Magic, which was the basically a G1 without the keyboard. So
Right.
the Dream was the G1 and the Magic, which was a developer phone that Google gave at Google I/O and was never sold. I think T-Mobile eventually sold it.
They did.
Briefly. And
I
then
think so.
I got the Droid, which was a revelation. And then I got the Nexus 1 immediately after, which was really like, wow, okay, we've landed. And then, from there, I went to a Nexus S, to a Galaxy Nexus, to all the Nexus numbers, 4, 5, 6, 5X and 6P. I switched between the two. I started with the 5X, moved to the 6P. And then, of course, the Pixel, I had the XL, now I have the 2XL, and then the 3XL with the 3. I don't know. I haven't figured it out yet. But what I'm saying is that a lot of people like Miriam, OnePlus has finally landed, like in the sense that to me, and you might agree, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, but the 6 was the first OnePlus phone that to me felt like there were so few compromises that I didn't see the need to buy a Pixel anymore. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it felt like it stopped being a fan project, and kind of like it kind of all of a sudden things got very serious, and it kind of and you could take it seriously, and it stood up to other phones, and you kind of like we were talking about RAM just before. All of a sudden you had to ask, well, hang on, why am I spending $200-300 more on your phone when I can go to OnePlus and I can get the same processor and I can get the same sort of camera sensors and I can get the same display and the same form factor and the same size of battery, and get it unlocked and the flexibility that brings and have, relatively fast software updates. What am I paying you for again?
Yeah. So people asking me this all the time. They're like, why don't you now, you've said at length that the OnePlus 6 is finally, ticks all the boxes for you. So why aren't you switching to that? And I'm honestly asking myself that question. It's a tough one to answer. I think my big answer is computational photography. Even though the OnePlus 6 takes great photos finally, it's just the baseline of great. I want more than great. I want exceptional. And that's what I'm getting out of my Pixel 2 XL. And that's what I got out of the Huawei Mate P20 Pro. And finally I felt like there was a phone that could compete with my Pixel 2 XL. But of course I couldn't adopt the Huawei as my main phone because that EMUI, I just can't live with it. And the lack of software updates. And I mean, they've been actually pretty good Huawei at updating their phones lately. But it's interesting to me that, I'm hanging kind of by a thread as to why I should continue being a Pixel user or a Nexus user. And
I think when when you've been on that kind of very bleeding edge of getting the latest features first, it's hard to step away from that and say, well, okay, I'm going to go to a different device that maybe saves me a little bit of money, but that I don't get everything immediately, and you like things straight away.
Yeah, and it's also kind of having Google's pure vision in my hands. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's kind of like this represents what Android should be. And this is a super controversial statement. I know some people completely disagree with me, that they say that, that's not what Android's about, that Android is about variety. And Android is about the fact that there's EMUI, and some people love EMUI, and that some people love TouchWiz, or whatever it's called now. I don't even know if it's called TouchWiz.
Samsung Experience, I believe.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so I'm just saying, like, but that to me, those Android days are long gone. I think that was kind of Android's Achilles heel, was the fact that Google was too permissive on the user experience. When they tightened things up, starting with the Galaxy Nexus and beyond that, and really I think started tightening things up with maybe Android Nougat, I felt it's really made the experience for Android users better. You can switch phones now, and if you're your Nova launcher on all your phones, for example, it's virtually the same experience. which didn't used to be the case. And to me, that's super exciting. But I feel that I kind of part of my stake digging is like, it's not just the camera, it's the fact that I know when I have a Pixel, I have the purest and most ultimate Google experience in my pocket. And I don't know if that's a valid reason anymore,
Yeah, it's a tough one. And then I feel like if you like the software experience that you get on a Samsung phone, or you like the software experience you get on a Huawei phone, then that's a perfectly good reason to go for those devices. I felt the same way about the P20 Pro. I loved that phone as a camera. The low light mode is just stupendous. It makes some beautiful photos, some of the best photos I've seen from a phone recently. But I just, the thought of living with the software day to day was just, I couldn't do that. It just felt like I would always be turning the phone on and feeling like I was missing out from what I could be having.
Give me an Android One version of that and we're done,
Yes.
Oh boy. But yeah, I think, on a side note, speaking of OnePlus, the 6T is now officially launching on the October 30th. So
that's right.
Keep your ears and eyes out for that, folks. Obviously, I'll be getting a device and all that good jazz. So I'll
obviously keep your ears and eyes open generally, because otherwise you could get run over.
Well, yes.
I'm just bringing safety to the podcast, Miriam.
Thank you, Chris.
No, you're welcome. You're welcome.
I appreciate it. This is where you're playing psychiatrist, psychologist.
Yes,
telling people to be mindful of their surroundings.
Just look up from your phone once in a while, at least while you're crossing the road, and always use the sidewalk.
Yep. And so, obviously the OnePlus 6T, I think in terms of what we know of it so far, which seems to also have leaked extensively, is a teardrop notch. Might actually just be kind of the sweet spot for those of you who don't like notches too much, but want a large screen to body ratio. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. I want to move on to, unless you have other things you want to add about there's really not too much to say.
I was just going to say, there's literally nothing else to say about the Pixel phone,
there is the wide angle front camera.
Yeah.
Right. So you don't sound too excited about that.
Well, the problem, Miriam, is that I don't have any friends to include in photos with me.
Oh.
No, I'm joking.
But what about photos when you're grilling? You need to include the grill.
It's true. And
I
have a very wide face, so it makes hat buying very difficult. So it is nice to be able to not have to ask someone else to hold the phone at a distance so I can fit in the front camera. I just feel like it just seems a bit strange that to have two lenses there, where you could just have a wide angle lens and then crop it down.
And computationally crop it down.
Yes.
Yeah, totally. Give us a nice 12 megapixel sensor in the front with a wide angle lens in front of it. And then you can do all the wonderful computational stuff you're doing in the back. And it still gives us the option of narrow and wide and purely in software. It's really weird.
It's an odd, and I wouldn't mind if they were doing some kind of Apple True Depth camera, Face ID, facial recognition, 3D mapping cleverness, but there doesn't seem to be any of that at the moment.
Because when I saw that notch on the 3XL, the leaks, I was like, okay, guys or folks, this is what's happening here. They're finally giving us a Face ID, proper depth sensing Face ID equivalent for Android that ties in with some code in Android Pie that makes it secure so you can use it for payments, say, right?
Yeah.
Because I think you and I talked about this maybe at the keynote yesterday, or maybe it was another journalist. I can't remember, but it was the whole thing about there are no Android phones today that have depth sensors that are able to be used for payment. So there are only two phones technically with depth sensors that I'm aware of right now, and that's the Oppo Find X and an upcoming phone that I can't talk about.
Right.
And as far as I know, neither of those two phones, they can unlock your phone really more securely than any other face identification system on any Android phone that normally just uses purely the camera.
Right.
Or the iris, like the
Samsung's. Yeah.
But they cannot be used for payment.
Mm-hmm.
What's up with that?
It's a really odd situation. And I don't get it. And it's weird because if you look at what Google has also been developing, if you look at all the work they did with Project Tango and all of that, they have the kind of the multiple cameras doing interesting 3D spatial stuff. They have that 3D mapping stuff. Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely not beyond them. I'm really bemused as to if they'd given us that notch and given us like a really advanced camera array that could do more interesting things than just be like, well, this is a 80-something degree lens and this is a 90-something degree lens, you'll fit more of your friends in. And I don't know the exact numbers. It looked actually that it was more than 90, considering how much in the demo they were showing included in the frame. And that's great, if you want to take a photo of yourself in front of a canyon. But I just feel like, I don't know if that compromises enough for the amount of times that I take canyon photos.
Well, you do canyon carve in those cars test.
This is true, yes. But I try not to.
You will find a use to make a selfie with you, your grill, and a car in the background.
Yeah. Though obviously you shouldn't transport.
I challenge you. You need to post that on Twitter.
I'll have to get a pickup truck,
Is that what you have right now?
No, I don't. No, actually, at the moment I have a bright yellow Mustang EcoBoost.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Convertible or regular?
Regular. Yeah.
Stick shift or auto?
Auto.
Oh. Sounds like a rental car.
It does sound like a rental car. Yes, it's. I'm
terrible. Like all the Mustang users right now are like mad at me, like instantly. I like the Mustang, folks. I'm just not. It's not something I would buy, but I appreciate it. I think that this current generation of Mustang. Well, I guess we're in the half state of the generation, aren't we now? Like it's the refresh. We're past the mid model refresh.
Yeah.
So the current generation, I feel, is finally like the one that when they introduced the independent rear suspension. To me, this Mustang is finally a car that I could see myself driving and owning. Prior to that, I do appreciate the history of the Mustang and even the Fox body side of it, because there's a lot to be done and said there. Lots of tinkering abilities in these vehicles, but totally not my thing. So there we are. My God, we're talking about everything but Google.
We are. I wonder if that says a lot about the event.
Well, let's talk about the Slate, because I am conflicted with that thing. And it seems like, at least from the headline of your story, which, by the way, I'll put in the show notes, like along with all the stories that Chris wrote about the event, you seem conflicted about the Slate as well.
I still am. And it's funny because I tried it and I wrote about it, and then I went and spoke with some of the people who, from both the Chrome OS team and the kind of the hardware team that had worked on developing it, and talked with them about some of the decisions that they've made and the reasons for it, and kind of got a little bit more certain and also a little bit more confused at the same time.
So what do you think Google is trying to do here? I mean, last year they gave us the Pixel Book, and unanimously everybody went, holy crap balls, this is awesome. And I got a review in it, and I'll have to tell you that I've been a long-term Chromebook user since the CR42. Do you remember that?
I do.
And I've been using all of the Pixel branded ones, and the Pixel Book is absolutely, by a long milestone, my favorite of
it's
all
excellent.
The Chromebooks.
I mean, the hardware is beautiful. The keyboard is sublime. The screen is great. I love the hinge design is great. It's like, what else do you need? Why do we even want to make a 2-in-1? Like 2-in-1s is, to me, I can't use them on my lap. I just don't like them. It's like when Microsoft finally made the Surface laptop, I was like, yes, finally. So, I loved everything about the Surface Pro, but I wanted it in laptop form factor. Thank you. I think, okay, so let's first start. I mean, I want to talk about what I like about it first before we get too negative. And I like the design. I think it looks good. I wish the blue was not quite so dark, because it kind of almost looks black, and I like blue. I think it's very, it's very thin, which is nice. I think the screen looks beautiful. That 3K by 2K res is, very nice. The keyboard is it borrows some of the tech from the Pixelbook keyboard, which is great. I wish that they'd kept the square keys.
Yes, it felt very close, the trackpad and keyboard, to my Pixelbook.
Yeah.
But the round keys are weird. And yes, they had this whole explanation on how it's easier to not accidentally hit other keys because there's more space around them or whatever. But it just seems like a cosmetic gimmick. And it's not a bad thing. It's not wrong. I just find it weird.
Yeah. And funnily enough, that's actually what the hardware team, the guy, said to me. I can't remember his name offhand, which is awful. But he basically said, if you look at kind of a key design theme that Google has. It's, at the moment, it's really pushing that circular thing, the circular G logo, the circular icons.
Yeah,
and this is kind of another, they wanted it to look jaunty and circular, which is fine, but I wonder whether, there is a time for squares. And sometimes that time is when you're typing.
At least they didn't make the trackpad circular.
That would be interesting. Or star-shaped, maybe. Yeah.
It's like the Apple mouse, the puck, remember?
Yes. Yeah. Now I kind of want to see that.
Oh, goodness. I mean, to me, the thing that I don't understand why Chrome OS on a tablet. Like, I know they're not the first to do it. Like, what is it? Acer or whatever did it first. And it's just like, no, like what makes Chrome OS so awesome is it gives you desktop experience, a mouse, meaning a trackpad, meaning a keyboard. And yes, you can touch the screen on the Pixelbook, and I do sometimes. Sometimes I use it as a tablet and I scroll through because I'm watching YouTube videos or something. Mm-hmm. It's fine, but like most of the time, you need the keyboard and trackpad to make Chrome OS a valid experience. So why even make a device where a $200 keyboard is optional?
I think it's, having again talked with some of the guys from the Chrome OS team, it's interesting how they've changed Chrome OS to kind of make it more tablet friendly. And they talked a little bit about that during the keynote, and I was like, okay, whatever. But actually, some of the changes, they make a lot of sense. The different places where the layout adjusts, because your hands will be in different places and different touch targets, that kind of thing. So I kind of don't have so much of an issue with Chrome OS on a tablet, and in fact I think it makes a lot more sense than Android on a tablet does.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
My concern is partly, as you say, this idea of the keyboard, which I do see as being like an essential accessory for most people, being a $200 extra. I think the pen, okay, I would have liked to have seen it thrown in rather than being $100, but sure, okay. Fair enough. Just the kind of the range of pricing that we've seen, starting, okay, that the headline price of $599 gets you a Celeron.
Yes.
And
it's worse than your smartphone. It's going to perform worse than a Pixel 3.
And then to get to the other extreme of that is just
$1,600.
Yeah. And it's, and you kind of feel like, well, again, I like Chrome OS. But I don't think I could see myself spending MacBook Pro money or Surface Book or money on a Chrome OS machine.
I do have a 16 gigabyte Core i7 Pixelbook, and I have to tell you that is, people look at me and go like, "Your Pixelbook with those specs?" I'm like, "Yeah, Chrome OS runs like a freaking dream on that thing." Okay,
oh, sure.
Like, it's so smooth. I mean, I get it. But the problem is it's too expensive because ultimately what you're still getting is a tablet without a keyboard that you still have to spend $200 on, et cetera, et cetera. It does have a fingerprint reader. It doesn't have a headphone jack. Interesting choices. I mean, the fingerprint reader is great.
Yep.
I think that had to happen. But the lack of headphone jack on a tablet, very odd.
I feel like if you look at it as an ecosystem thing, it makes more sense.
Right.
It's funny, I have headphones plugged into my laptop at the moment because, while I'm talking to you, most of the time I just use my AirPods.
Of course
or
you do,
or another set of wireless headphones. The number of times I've used the headphone jack is very, very low. And I feel like, if you're a Pixel Slate user and also like a Pixel 3 XL user or whatever, you have your phone and your tablet, you'll just be switching your wireless headphones between the two because you'll already have wireless headphones because all of the phone companies are ditching headphone jacks. So, you might as well just wirelessly connect them to the tablet. I think that
means the next iPad is not going to have a headphone jack.
I feel like,
if Google beat Apple to it.
Yeah. I think people will complain, and then they'll go out and buy a set of AirPods, and they'll find out how great AirPods are, and
it'll be done,
and they'll be
It's just interesting to me that they made that decision. That's
yes, yeah. No, I agree with you.
My other observations about the Slate, I spent very little time with it compared to you, but I felt it was too heavy. The Slate with the keyboard together, like case keyboards combo, felt heavier than my Pixelbook. Or my MacBook 12-inch, which surprised me because I'm like, it's a tablet. Like it seems heavier as a tablet than an iPad Pro 12-inch to me.
It's Yeah, I mean, I didn't have an iPad Pro 12-inch with me to sort of compare them. I think what I can say is that the balancing of the weight on the Pixel Slate has been really nicely done, and that's something else they were talking about. They decided that it's been evenly balanced across it, so there's no sort of heavy point. If you hold it from the left side, it's not kind of being weirdly weighted on the right side or vice versa. And also they've been very careful with the cooling side of it. Obviously, it's fanless, but there's the promise that they made to me was that there would be no kind of hot spots. Where all of a sudden you put your fingers and oh, okay, that's getting a bit toasty. So
my Pixelbook does get toasty sometimes.
Yeah.
So I know that. I mean, it's fanless and it manages to be fine even in hot summer days. But yeah, I mean, look, we'll see. We'll all be getting review units. I'm a huge Chrome user. I'm looking forward to changing my mind. Right now, I'm very skeptical. I'm feeling like I need to cling on to my Pixelbook. You will not take this out of my cold dead hands, sort of thing. Google Home, what is it? Hub. What's your take on that one?
Okay, my first reaction was, wow, it's small. It's funny, we'd seen the leaked renders, and you saw it kind of on stage in the kind of the staged photos, and I was expecting something bigger, even with a 7-inch screen.
I was delighted about how small it was.
And after that kind of initial, I think that it's the cutest and most sort of instantly, that kind
likable.
Likable. Yeah, it's that sort of.
It's very likable.
It's the little puppy of smart displays compared to what else is out there. It's well designed.
I mean, the Lenovo ones look so edgy and like they're going to cut you when you touch them.
Yes. Yeah, they do. And
this is going to cuddle you when you touch it.
It will.
It's like the panda.
Yes.
Of home. What are they called? Smart displays?
Smart displays. That's what I've been calling them. I don't know if we really have a proper category for them because it's like a smart speaker with a touchscreen, but that's far too long. We don't have time for that. The climate change is destroying the world.
That's right.
Yeah, it is the smart display which will show you a cute video of puppies and then soak up your tears as you sob with happiness. It's that fabric cover is really nice, and the colors are just
fabric. Yeah, will soak up your tears. I see what you did there, Chris.
Thank you.
That's very good.
Thank you very much. I'll be here all week. Release the veil. They have made them. There is such a conscious effort that you can see there to make them appealing and unthreatening and charming, and to make someone come into your home and be like, oh, what's that? That's nice, rather than this sort of menacing obelisk of I have all the data in the world and a mean voiced AI to help you with it.
It's like it's the anti-HAL 9000.
Yeah, it is. It's like it's HAL 9000.
It's like very Chumby-ish. Do you remember Chumby?
I do remember Chumby, yes.
It's like Chumby. It's like clothy and rounded corners and soft and cuddly. If the screen could be furry, it would be furry.
It would absolutely be furry. Yeah, and I think they've made some really interesting decisions there. Even to the point where they sacrifice functionality. There's no camera,
and I think that's really smart in this day and age. I think that. My favorite Amazon product is the small display one.
Yeah,
What's it
Spot.
called? The Spot, right?
Yes.
I love that this surround display too. It's really fantastic. And that does not have a camera, does it?
It does.
Oh, it does.
Yes. Yeah. So this is why you shouldn't have been showering in front of it. Jeff Bezos has been watching you.
But I really think that's really smart for Google. The price is really good too, $149.
Yes.
I think the fact that there's a physical mute switch on the back, so you can turn off the mic, and there's no camera. To me, all those things combined, and the cute design, and the fact that it has a screen, which can really be useful. Sometimes when you're talking to the AI, to Google Assistant, I love my Google Assistant. She's so freaking smart. She knows so much about me and makes my life so much better. And I sometimes wish she could display something on an ambient display for me rather than on my phone. And so this is going to be awesome for that.
Yeah, and I'm kind of pleased to see that Google is doing it. Amazon with the recently the second gen Echo Show and the software update that they're going to push out to the kind of the existing Echo Show is this idea of having there are times when you just want an on-screen button. If I'm controlling my smart lights, maybe I don't want to say or teach my guests how to say hey Google, let's turn on lights in the living room, or turn on light fixture 2 and turn on light fixture 3. I just want to be able to be like, tap, tap, tap. These are the lights they're on.
And now you triggered everybody's phones on the podcast. Thank you, Chris.
You're welcome.
This is awesome. They're going to love it. But no, I see your point. And I think I'm actually really excited about this product. Strangely. And I really think that they made all the right calls. I think Amazon should make one without a camera.
I'd like to see that too.
At a reduced price, like a spot that's cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, Facebook, obviously, who's going to trust Facebook with that thing? By the way, what was it called again?
The Facebook portal. And I have to say, I mean, I totally get you. It was the perfectly wrong time for Facebook to launch, an attempt to get a camera into your house. But that thing, so I went to a pre-briefing for that and sat down with some of the people on the Facebook team who had kind of developed it, and the software and the hardware. And the hardware, let me tell you, it's really nicely done, particularly the larger one, the Portal Plus with that rotating screen. I'm a sucker for a kind of a damped swinging mechanism, and that has a really nice swinging mechanism. And then they ran through the AR stories, which is basically, on one side, you have a script. It works like a teleprompter, basically. And on the other side, it shows like a children's story. So it was, like the Three Little Pigs, for instance. And then it overlays, the person telling the story. You can see their face at different parts of it. So you can be, at one point you're a pig, and at another point, you're the big bad wolf, and it overlays onto your face, and and does all the graphics and everything, and the sound effects. And we had a room, well, 2 rooms, because I was chatting with someone on another portal on another room. 2 rooms of adults roaring with laughter. It was hilarious, just, people pretending to be the wolf and trying to outdo each other, on how ridiculous could this wolf be. And I don't know if the Facebook team had been drinking. I know I hadn't, but it was a lot of fun. And they've said that, publishers have been very upbeat about it, and also they're looking at kind of bringing in more titles aimed at adults. I don't want to say adults titles, because that's a different type of video call, but titles, sort of AR titles aimed at adults, to kind of do this, because it's good fun. And then I kind of run up against the fact that it's good fun, but it's also Facebook.
Exactly. So that's my point. It's like, I'm sure the hardware and the software is awesome. I know who worked on the software. Itai Fonchak used to work with me at Pebble. He's one of the folks on that team, I believe. And I'm like, if it wasn't associated with Facebook, it would be such an easier pill to swallow. If this was a Google product or an Amazon product, I think it would fly much better.
It would.
Anyway, so I'm excited about the Google Home Hub, and there's a bunch of integrations with third parties, which seem to be a little beyond the Nest stuff, which I think Google is still very weak on. I actually have Amazon Echoes in most of my rooms to control my smart home, and I have Google Homes in most of my rooms to talk to my assistant. It's kind of like I have like this kind of dual lifestyle of assistants, because one does my home automation and the other one does everything else. So,
well, nobody has just one butler, do they? I mean, you always have to have, if you're going to have a staff, Valley, you need many more.
Another thing I wanted to briefly talk about before we quickly go to some quick news items are the fact that the Pixel 3 and 3 XL have wireless charging and now have a stand, the Pixel stand, that you can use to charge them wirelessly, and it's a nice integration. It actually turns your Pixel into essentially a mini Google Home Hub while it's docked. So you can use, and supposedly the speakers are really good. I haven't tested them yet, but it means that you can have pretty much use it as like a Google Home Hub, a display-based Google Home speaker while it's docked and charging. Interesting kind of idea.
It's a really clever idea. It's the kind of thing where you're like, well, okay, they should all do this. And there have been other smart docks, which will turn into a different kind of mode, depending on.
For sure, yeah. But I think this is going to be done probably better than anything else.
Yes. And I think it comes back to what we were talking about before, that it is Google doing it with Google's own software and Google designed hardware.
Vertically integrated. Look at what Apple does. It works.
All about your ecosystem.
Absolutely. You got, I think we can talk about this, the Razer Phone 2.
We can talk about this.
You got briefed. Give us a very quick, because we have to wrap up the podcast. Give us a very quick kind of like, what's your thought on this? It seems like an updated version of last year's Razer, basically, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a really, really good strategy for them. You know, the original Razer phone, it was this device that wasn't going to necessarily win any aesthetic rewards unless you really like black obelisks, which some people do, and I'm not judging you. But, you know, there are a couple of kind of criticisms about it. It didn't have wireless charging. It wasn't waterproof, that kind of thing. And what they've basically done is they've taken everything that people really liked about the first one. So you still get the kind of the cutting edge processor, in this case, Snapdragon 845. You still get plenty of RAM. You know, you still get the beautiful screen, which is 120 hertz, not only touch like the iPhone XS, but also refresh rate, which is still unique.
Right.
In the US, at least. And then they've kind of fixed the complaints that people had. So it has wireless charging now.
So is it a glass back then?
It's a glass back. It's wireless charging. They're making I think a 15-watt wireless charger. And
it has a glow-in-the-dark logo.
It has a glow-in-the-dark. So the logo actually, it's the Razer Chroma system, which they have on all of their gaming keyboards and mice and things. And you can set it to flash in different colors depending on different notifications. So, you know, if you have a work email come in, for instance, that could be red. If you have someone mentioning you on Twitter, that could be blue. You know, if a certain person contacts you on the phone, that might be puce. I don't know. It's you know, it's interesting, and also they have a wireless charger which can hold the phone kind of upright or flat, and the base of that will flash as well in different colors. So it's just, you know, they've done a kind of a good job of taking what people liked about the original phone, which is improving it, and you know, it's much louder. It's, you know, but it doesn't distort. You know, the sound's much better. The screen is still great.
Even better. Wow, it was already pretty damn great.
It's, you know, I was sat there and they brought out a sound meter and recorded 96 decibels from it in the meeting room that I was in.
Wow.
And but I mean, more importantly, it wasn't just the volume, but it was the fact that there was no distortion there. It was, you know,
it was perfectly clear. Is the camera any better? Because that was a bit of a sore spot last year, right?
Yeah, dual cameras on the back, both 12 megapixels. One of them is a regular one, the other's 2x optical zoom.
Are they both stabilized?
Only the regular one, I believe, is optically stabilized. Otherwise, it's digital.
You know, they keep doing that. HTC 12, V40, non-stabilized telephoto. If there's one lens to stabilize, it's your telephoto, okay?
Yeah, you would think, wouldn't you?
Weird.
It is.
Oh, wow.
But generally, I mean, I think, and it's $799 unlocked, which is $100 more than the original Razer phone. But I feel like in comparison to...
for a gaming phone with a display like that, I think it's a reasonable.
I kind of feel like it's wasted on just gamers, personally. I don't...
Yeah.
I'm not a gamer myself, but, you know, I you know, if I was interested in having the cutting edge hardware with an amazing screen, a phone that, you know, you didn't need to pair it up to a Bluetooth speaker to fill a hotel room with music. You know, it's a kind of it's an all-in-one little powerhouse, and I was really impressed with it.
Cool. Well, I'll post the link to your hands-on in the show notes. There are a few topics I wanted to kind of touch on really quickly because they're kind of interesting things and they get lost in the brouhaha because October is such a crazy month for announcements.
It's the brouhaha month.
It's the brouhaha month when it comes to smartphones. Galaxy A9 with 4 rear cameras.
We need more cameras.
I know, it's kind of amazing to me that this is the mid-range line of the Samsung, and it's kind of beating the high-end Galaxy S and Galaxy Note series in terms of camera count. And it's kind of like also, I think, giving Huawei the middle finger a little bit here on a mid-range phone. It's really interesting to me that it has 4 cameras. One is a wide angle, one is a regular, one is an optically zoomed tele. But the fourth one is completely unnecessary. It's for depth. Like, why don't you use one of the other 2 for depth?
And here's my cynical thinking, that it's cheaper to get 4 and accommodate 4 sort of mid-range, more affordable sensors and lenses than it is to get 2 or 3 good sensors and lenses that can kind of do multiple things that, you know, that those 4 are doing.
Completely right.
Maybe I'm being cynical there, but I kind of feel like, you know, if they can afford to do it on an A series phone, something has to give.
Yeah, absolutely. But let's, I'll put a link to a SlashGear story. I think it's interesting I think the A series is a bit underrated. I think they're pretty cool phones.
They are.
We don't get many of them in the US, but if you're in Europe, you're already well familiar with them. So yeah. Andy Rubin is talking about making another smartphone, and that it would be able to automatically reply to text messages for you using AI. That's what I got the gist of it. You wrote that story, so you want to give us like the 30-second rundown?
So this is Bloomberg with the scoop. Mark over there, who is obviously a leak powerhouse.
Of course.
And what he has heard from sources close to Essential is that they're working on. They scrapped the Essential Phone 2.
Right.
Sales of the original were dire.
Of course.
The smart home device has kind of been put on hold at the moment, which is probably not a bad idea. And now they're looking at, well, okay, what can we do which is different and which will help us stand out rather than just fire sales on Amazon? And and I think and so this idea that apparently they have had is, well, how about if we have a phone which does have a screen, but it's a smaller screen, and instead it will use AI to kind of try and do more things proactively for you. So in making phone calls and appointments for you, replying to text messages, sounding like you, which is an interesting one, because obviously there are services, if you turn on Do Not Disturb while driving on your iPhone and someone sends you a text message, it will reply and say, this person is driving at the moment and can't reply. But it doesn't really pretend to be you. It pretends to kind of just be the phone being a helpful co-pilot. So I think there's an interesting idea of there, well, okay, just how close can it get? And, do we want our phones to kind of enter that uncanny valley of this, is this me? Is this Chris? Is this Chris's phone? And then, and can we trust the AIs to kind of just be, functional enough? If anyone with a smart speaker knows the kind of the annoyance of asking it to do something and getting a completely different response, or asking it to do something and that it can do, and it say, oh, I don't think I can do that right now. Do you really want to be interacting with your phone with that on an everyday basis? And a lot, I think it's interesting. I think Andy Rubin is very clever, and the team he has over at Essential is very, very clever.
Absolutely.
Certainly. I think a lot of it will come down to form factor. And what they're billing it, as far as I can tell, or as far as Mark's report was saying, is it's kind of like it would be a companion device for someone maybe wanting to marginalize their smartphone a little more, not always be addicted to it.
Yeah, I mean, as like a weekend or night going out on the town kind of device. Yeah,
maybe, or even if they can do it in some sort of if it was an ear-based form factor, I think that there is an awful lot of interesting sort of work that could be done there that we started to kind of see with Motorola doing with, I can't remember the name of their product now.
I remember
the earbud one, which was supposed to kind of also be an assistant and just didn't
it's
really
like
do
her,
it.
Right?
Yeah, and I think that could be really interesting, but I think it will depend on an awful lot of factors which will be difficult to do, and which we have seen even big companies like Google and Duplex, trying to get that to work and try and be consistent. And even when that launches, it will only be able to talk to a handful of restaurants in a handful of locations. And Essential is exponentially smaller than Google is or Apple is. Yeah.
I mean, I wish them luck. I'm, fond of what Andy Rubin's been able to do. The Essential was, had lots of flaws, but was really quite a lovely phone.
It was charming.
In its very own special way.
Yes.
And I've only fond memories of using it as a reviewer. We'll see how it goes. I want to bring up one last thing in the topics because it's kind of cool. I love DIY. I like Arduinos and Maker and Raspberry Pi things. And there's this kid in Croatia. I was actually speaking at a conference in Croatia in January, and I met him there.
Huh.
He made a tiny little 8-bit game console built around an Arduino called the Maker Buino. And he gave me one to play with. It's really great. And the same person has just launched, so a year later now, has just launched the Maker Phone, which is basically a DIY phone. You can either buy in kit form or pre-built. It's just a dumb phone. Well, it does have, a color screen, but it's not a touch screen, I don't think. And it's, you can build your own phone, tinker with it, or just use it as is. And it's just, it looks like it might support some of the gaming features of the little mini console that he built last year. So I'll link to an article from Mashable that I found about this. And at first I was like, oh, this is cool. It's another one of those DIY projects. But this kid, he built this really great little console really cheap. And so this is kind of like the next product from him. And once I figured out it was him, I was like, oh yeah, I need to mention this. So
yeah, I think it's really interesting, as an example of where these really affordable computer boards like the Arduino and other devices kind of like it, and this idea of, well, okay, if we give people access to a really, really affordable chunk of compute, which is really designed to be extensible as much as possible, what are they going to come up with? And
I mean, this is just $89 and you can build it yourself, and so that you can use it as a basis for tinkering if you want. So
And not just, this is okay, well, this is a guy who's made his own phone from an Arduino. This is a guy who's made not just a phone, but a business from it. And, reading that Mashable article that you sent, it's a business that now apparently employs 7 people.
Exactly.
This is not just like someone tinkering with something in their bedroom, and not that there's anything wrong with tinkering in your bedroom, but, this is a full-on business that is based on this kind of incredible, low-cost, affordable, relatively low compute, but still so customizable and flexible product that, it kind of makes me very excited that we live in a time when people have access to things like that.
Absolutely. So I think we should wrap up. I just want to mention to everyone that, of course, Chris and I both have all the Google device. Well, not the Slate or the Hub, but we do have the phones. And, we will be having reviews and more thoughts on it out once we're allowed to talk more about them. But in the meantime, keep an eye on our various social media channels to see some photos taken with the phones. And we'll definitely have a lot more coverage about these devices coming up on the show in the next 2-3 weeks. Thanks for being on the show, Chris. It's really nice to have you again.
It is always a pleasure.
And do you want to tell folks where they can find you on the internet?
Yes, you can find me on Twitter at C_Davies. I write for SlashGear, which is slashgear.com, or on Twitter at SlashGear. Or you can just find me in the street howling.
That's true. You're always in the streets howling.
Just bawling at the top of my voice. Yeah, trying to attract the wolves.
It's amazing. People have no idea.
They really don't.
You know where to find me on the internets, folks. I'm at Tankgirl. That's TNKGRL, like the comic book character Tankgirl, but without the vowels. That's also the same handle that I have on Instagram, and you can find me on Facebook and on YouTube, youtube.com/Miriam Jouar, where you'll find a channel that complements this podcast with videos, hands-ons, unboxings, reviews. Subscribe to the channel, subscribe to the podcast. mobiletechpodcast.com is where you'll find the RSS feed. We're also on Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Slacker, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio. So subscribe, tell your friends, and I do also want to thank our sponsor, Audible. Audible.com is the place where you go for audiobooks. If you love audiobooks, I really highly suggest you get a subscription. It's a great way to listen to books rather than having to read them if you can't read because maybe you're driving or maybe you're trying to fall asleep. Fun stuff. Audible, there's a link in the show notes. It's audibletrial.com/mobiletech. That's audibletrial.com/mobiletech. If you click through this link and sign up for Audible, you'll support the podcast, so we appreciate it. Stay tuned. We'll have more next week. And Chris, thanks again for being on the show. Always a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everybody. Cheers.
Goodbye.
This has been the Mobile Tech Podcast with Tank Girl, proudly presented by worldpodcasts.com. You can visit us online at mobiletechpodcast.com.